All right, last video. How can we write the factored form of the quadratic function related to the graph? So here's our quadratic function. We want to write our function in factored form. So we're going to want to know what the factors are, which relate to the x-intercepts, and we're also going to need to know what the a value is. So here are the steps. Let's walk through this. Step 1, find the x-intercepts. Well, if we look at the graph, we can see we have an x-intercept at -5 and +1. Great. Step 2, write the quadratic equation in factored form. So we're going to have our a value out front, and then here's where our two factors are going to go. Those are going to have the x's, and then something to keep in mind, if -5 is the x-intercept, that means we solved an equation and we got -5 as the answer, which means it was an x plus 5. This x plus 5 got set equal to 0, we solved, and we got -5. Kind of reminds us of our tricky x a little bit, doesn't it? All right, if the other x-intercept is 1, we solved an equation to get this 1, which means it started out as x -1. This factor was set equal to 0. We solved to get that +1. So we're working backwards a little bit here. This whole thing is equal to 0. So there's our quadratic equation in factored form. Now, in order to write the function, we do need to know what this a value is. And we can use a third point on our parabola and solve the equation for a. You can use any third point you want. We've got our vertex right here. I'm actually going to grab this point right here, the y-intercept. If that's a clean point you can use, then it's pretty easy. So that third point, we're going to use 0, -5. Sometimes just using a 0 as your x or y makes it a little bit easier. So our function, I guess I skipped over this, write the function in factored form. So our function is f of x equals a times x plus 5 times x minus 1. We're going to use this ordered pair. The ordered pair provides us with an x and a y that we can use to plug into our equation, into our function, and solve for a. So remember, f of x is the same thing as y. We're going to replace the f of x with the -5. The a we don't know, we're going to leave that, but we're going to replace these x's with the x from our third point, that's 0. So 0 plus 5 times 0 minus 1. Then we just have to clean it up a little bit. We have -5 equals a times 0 plus 5 is 5. 0 minus 1 is -1. And then this is all multiplication over here. A times 5 times -1 is -5a equals the -5 out front. And now we just divide by that -5 to get our a value is equal to 1. Now that we know what a is, we can write our function. F of x equals, the a goes out front 1 times, and then we already know the rest is x plus 5 times x minus 1. And there's our quadratic function in factored form that relates to the graph. All right, let's run through one more of those. What is the factored form of the function? So first thing, identify the x-intercepts. So if we look at the graph, we have an x-intercept at 3 and an x-intercept at 9. Great, first step done. Next, we're going to write the quadratic equation in factored form. So we have to include the a times, we've got our x's. Now remember, we solved an equation and got a +3, so it was an x minus 3 in factored form. If we got a +9 for our intercept, it started out as x minus 9, and then that is equal to 0. Step 3 is let's take that and write it as instead of an equation, as a function. So f of x equals a times x minus 3 times x minus 9. And then we're going to take an ordered pair, a point on the parabola, to plug in the x and y and solve for a. We can't use the y-intercept here, but that vertex is pretty clear. We can go ahead and use the vertex. That point is 6 and negative 9. So there's an x, there's a y. We replace the f of x with the y value of negative 9 equals a times, and we replace the x's with that 6. 6 minus 3 times 6 minus 9. We'll do that little math in there. 6 minus 3 is 3. 6 minus 9 is negative 3. Negative 9 equals, if you multiply those three together, you get negative 9a. Divide both sides by negative 9, and, well, look at that. We got a 1 again. It's not always going to be a 1, but it is right there. So final answer, f of x equals, we know our a value is 1, and then we have our factored form of x minus 3 times x minus 9.